And Jesus is approached by a lawyer. And in our 21st century ears, we think we know what that means, but we have to remember this was not someone who practiced civil law like we do today. It would have been an expert in Mosaic law, or the law of Moses. In other words, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So this was a lawyer who was an expert in religious law and would have known exactly what you were supposed to do, what you weren't supposed to do, and probably upheld the letter of the law very carefully. So the text says that he approached Jesus in order to test him. And he asks, what must he do to inherit eternal life? Now Jesus is so brilliant. He's often being trapped trying to come up with either this or that in some situation where it seems like there's no way out. And Jesus always comes up with a third option or does something very clever. Like in this, he puts the question back on the lawyer. And he says, well, what does the law say? Now I want to highlight this is the second time we've had a reference to the law. It's a lawyer, it's an expert in Mosaic law, and Jesus references the law again. What does the law say? And the lawyer quotes Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now the lawyer wants to make sure he's got it right, so he presses the issue further and says, but who is my neighbor? So we have to remember again that this entire parable is an answer to that question. This whole parable is an illustration. It's seeking to respond to the context with which the lawyer approaches Jesus. For me, that colors the lens, then, with which I see this passage. And we notice, of course, that in this story, it's not the person that we would expect who is the one who shows compassion. And again, the word pity is used in the NRSV, but it is often the root of that is still the same word for compassion. So the religious leaders, the priest and the Levite, are the one who leave the man by the side of the road. They're the ones that we would expect to show compassion. Now we know, of course, that they do that because to do so would be to make them ritually unclean, right? So if they do that, or they touch him, or they take care of him, they might not be able to go back to their own communities and perform rituals there. They would have to go through another purification ritual. So according to the purity code of that day, according to the law, the priest and the Levite are acting in accordance with their law. They're sort of bound by that particular purity code. Now, we notice who does stop. The one that we don't expect, right? The one who's a complete surprise. The one who would be despised, who is an outsider, as Carl said. And that's the second sermon I would like to preach some other time where we really focus on that. But what we notice is the one we don't expect in this passage. And what I love are the description of how he does that. He takes time. He doesn't just throw the guy on his horse and go, oh, well, I guess I'm supposed to do this, and so I guess I'll take him to the end, because that's what I'm supposed to do. He takes time. He tends to his wounds. He pours oil on them, healing oil. He binds his wounds. He takes care of him. Then he takes them to the inn. When he can't do it anymore, he gives money so that the person can be taken care of. He makes a commitment to come back and follow up. He goes the extra mile, which tells me this was true compassion. He had true empathy for him. He wasn't just doing it out of a sense of religious duty. As a matter of fact, if that person was a Jew, and there's good reason to suspect that he was, the Samaritan wasn't even supposed to touch him. The Samaritan has empathy, and the Samaritan is the one who's breaking all the purity codes of the day, just by the fact that he's a Samaritan and by what he's doing. It's not the people upholding the law, it's not the people upholding the purity code that are lifted up in this passage. It's the person who's breaking all the rules, it's the person who goes by the law of compassion. He is the one who is lifted up as a hero, and Jesus says, go and do likewise. Now it seems to me that on one level, Jesus was often seeking to, if you will, reform Judaism. Not that there's anything wrong with Judaism per se, but when the places where Judaism in his time was so strict that it was upholding the letter of the law over the spirit of it, Jesus sought to remind it of its purpose. That the purpose of the law was to love God, self, and neighbor more fully. We see that when Jesus heals on the Sabbath again and again. He is criticized for it because according to the letter of the law, he's not supposed to be doing it, but he shows compassion for the individual who needs help. The woman caught in adultery. According to the law of Moses, that woman should have been stoned. Jesus is the only one that actually treats her with compassion, not just a pawn in the political game. And in a sense, he supersedes or finds an en route around the law of Moses because he's dealing with this person with compassion. The woman at the well, according to the purity codes, he shouldn't even have been talking to her, much less receiving a cup from her hand because she was also a Samaritan. Again and again and again, Jesus is dealing with people who are the outcasts of society, and his rule seems to be the law of love over the purity code. Now, that does not mean that he threw out the law. Of course not. He studied it. He knew it very well. He taught in the synagogues. It said that he taught as one with authority. So he knew the law, but I think he understood that the purpose of the law, again, was to love God, self, and neighbor more fully. And if there are places where the law was worshipped as an end in itself, or perfectionism to the law took precedent over human compassion, that's where it needed realignment.